Hi at Collaborative 2020. My name is Joy Barnes-Johnson. I've been a teacher for 26 years. I teach science and racial literacy in the Princeton Public Schools.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jamarious Nickerson, JeanRenoit. I've been an educator for almost a decade in the area of English language arts. Particularly, I wish that from this Ed Collab, everyone will understand the importance of students having a part in the implementation of curriculum.
Hello, my name is Sky Reynolds. I'm currently a junior at Princeton High School and I aspire to be an art therapist. After my presentation, I hope that you will understand the importance of young leadership.
Hello, my name is Khalil Benjamin. I'm currently a junior at Princeton High School, and when I'm older, I plan on becoming a leader in some area of study. What I hope you take from my presentation is the additions I would like to add into the English curriculum.
Hi, my name is JeanRenoit. I'm a junior at Princeton High School. In the future, I hope to either become a children's psychologist or a criminal defense lawyer. And I hope that the message you take from my presentation tonight is how we as a society can learn to embrace and appreciate bicultural identity. 大家好，我的名字叫应小丫 or JeanRenoit。我长大以后想当一个儿童心理学家或者一个刑事辩护律师。我希望你们今天晚上听完我的报告以后，能学到我们怎么能会拥抱双重文化身份。谢谢你们。
So as the facilitator of today's conference presentation, please enjoy what we've put together for expanding the canon at the place where the beat drops. My name is Dr. Joy Barnes-Johnson, and it's my pleasure to present Expanding the Canon at the Place Where the Beat Drops. We'll talk about traditional learning experiences, the various ways that we would prefer that the themes and the history change, and gain new insights into how learning must be different in the 21st century, especially post-pandemic 2020. We recognize the theories of several scholars in this work, but here's our major idea. Celebrate students. Now listen to the next generation. Each collaborator inspired a poem that I'll also share with their discussion.
Poetry is an art that allows the writer and reader to connect in a rhythmic style. The ability to read and write poetry is a must-have in schools. Poetry helps young writers exit from a standard way of writing and develop their creative minds into changing pace and length of their literature. One of my favorite pieces that I was lucky to read in English was We Wear the Mask by Paul Laurence Dunbar. My teacher, Mr. Nickerson, broke down the structure and style of the poem. He showed us the stylistic choices and poetic license that the writer used each line. You see, anyone can simply read poetry. To a covered eye, they are just another set of words on a page. It was not until the secrets that were hidden within the lines were uncovered that I was able to transform my own writing entirely. When writing an essay for a class on a topic one is not really interested in, the authority at which they speak is lacking. But it isn't until you give a writer complete authority and control over each space and each word and every punctuation that they bring their own reflection. On top of being able to take authority in their poems, the skills can also be transferred into other pieces of literature. Now, when reading novels, students will have the strength to notice more than just the words, but the details hidden in every line. For the past few weeks during this quarantine, I, like many other teens, have been on social media and our phones in general for a more extended period. I've seen a 2+ hour increase in my screen time during this period. Now, on the surface, no immediate problem seems grave. What I've noticed is the further into quarantine we get, and the information people are receiving on how much longer we will be away from each other, the more bold and audacious people are becoming. Our phones offer us a feeling of distance and communication combined, allowing us to voice our opinions without immediate repercussions. Now, what quarantine is doing is putting no time limit on how long we won't see each other. This ability to say or do anything on social media and not have to see the people you're saying it to for a long period of time has caused people to exhibit a sense of negative energy on these different platforms. People are spending more and more time on social media, taking in an array of fact and fictitious content. The language control on these platforms is non-existent, so the creators can use any level of explicit terms in their posts. What we can all agree on is everyone learns new things on social media, though the content that you are learning or engaging with supposedly wraps around your interests. Where I see the problem is that this creates a one narrative or one line of thinking. What this does lead people down a path of a single story, only seeing the world through their social media set of contacts. And unfortunately, with the increase of the amount of time we're spending on our phones during this outbreak, the more and more extensive amount of false information we will be taking in. The solution doesn't have to be complicated. Put down your phone, and when you're on it reading and consuming content, always fact-check substantial claims if warranted.
Khalil, thank you for sharing your insights on what it's like to actually be dealing with this as a student. You seem to focus on the social aspects. And so what exactly is the impact of social isolation and social distancing on literary habits and what you imagine next school year is going to be like?
So my thoughts on next school year and like the work. So the way I'm looking at school right now, I'm looking at it in a very like day by day kind of way. So instead of looking at, I haven't really spent a lot of time looking at the next year because of all the changes that possibly will happen in the coming months.
Mm-hmm.
So is it a good thing, or what are you thinking? Is this moving in the right direction? So the beat dropped, right? Pandemic dropped beat, changing everything. And do you feel like it's an opportunity to see better education, more representation, or no?
But there are good things that are going to come out of this, and I hope that I can be a part of that as well.
Absolutely.
Well, I have one more question, and then I'll defer to Mr. Nickerson. You mentioned this like barrage of negative imagery and negative or false information. And so I'm always like, okay, we have all kinds of literacy. Language is just one type of literacy, but I really want people to sort of understand that information literacy is key. And the kinds of things that we communicate in texts, that whether they are fictional or non-fictional, are like transformative on how people not only see themselves, but how people see others, especially when you're looking from the outside in. So this concept of really understanding text. What do you think about ultimately all of the negative information, all of the racist propaganda that's been percolating through? What's this doing?
Well, it's letting people realize that now they're getting a taste of what Black people have been dealing with for a very long time. That's what's essentially happening. People are starting to realize that this isn't something, oh, why do you keep talking about racism? This is something that needs to be talked about. So people are starting to understand, different groups are starting to understand, that are like feeling a slice of the cake that Black people have been feeling. They're starting to feel that. But that's an unfortunate thing. Obviously, I don't wish that upon anyone. But some of the negative things that I'm seeing, like the racism and everything that's on the social medias and the texts and the context, people don't have to answer to anyone anymore. People have realized that there's no body, there's no like party that they have to answer to. They can say whatever they want to, and nothing will happen for them for a long time. You start to see it in your personal like circles too, when you're dealing with other people. People are very, very bold when you know you're not going to see that person for a long time. You get a certain confidence and certain like level of like I have now a certain type of power over these other people because my voice, one, is stronger than theirs. I have a larger body of people that listen to me, and I don't have to deal with this person face to face and get embarrassed by them that way. I can just say everything I want to online, and there'll be no repercussions later.
Yeah, I agree. Mr. Nickerson, you have anything else?
Yeah, I was going to add that I feel that the demand for communication amongst different races, different socioeconomic classes has now like sort of come to this sort of melting pot point where you no longer are able to stay within your sphere and just pretend that life just happens in your sphere. That you're now disrupted by the type of systems that are around you, whether it is linguistic systems, whether it is the information processing that you see going on. All of it is now disrupted, and so I feel that with literature, especially as an English teacher, it is my job to be able to now more than ever be able to let children see the difference between the nonlinear text and linear text. I'll speak more about that when my time comes, but I feel that now more than ever, we have to teach literature differently. We have to equip kids with understanding, okay, I'm not only accountable for the information that I go and pursue, but I'm also accountable for the information that I allow myself to subscribe to or to produce. And so that is the first step with that is getting them to see characters in literature that reflect their experiences, or getting them to study exactly how is this text designed, why is it designed this way, and how does the design of this text impact society as a whole. So as an English teacher, I thought it would be very important to speak about the need for exposing my students to stories that have no linear trajectory. When we think about stories in general, stories have basic structures. And when we think about structures, we speak very clearly about the way a text is organized. Most of the literature in most of our white dominated curriculums focus on stories that have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Usually, the stories that do not have this linear trajectory often are not the ones that you will find in the hands of our students. So it is important that we understand that experiences do not happen in a linear format. And so why are we still having texts in the classroom that still focus on a beginning, a middle, and an end? Would it be so amiss of us to expose children to literature that began with the denouement and ended with the exposition? Would it be so amiss of us to expose children to literature that actually reflects the unchronological order of experiences that they have faced themselves? We live in a 21st century environment where kids have experienced trauma um, in some magnitude. They know what trauma is. They might not can vocalize it. They might not, can speak to it as accurately as psychologists or sociologists would say they should, but all human beings in general have known some form of trauma. And so the importance, when I think of the first story that I ever read that was a nonlinear story, actually was the story entitled Black Boy, and it was written by Richard Wright. And the story is so striking to me because it didn't begin with, hey, here's the characters, hey, here is the problems with the characters. No, it actually began with a house fire. That in itself was a traumatic event. And it began with, in that house fire, Richard Wright's grandmother dies. And on top of all of that, he is the one who has set the fire in the first place. So for me to have that sort of text in front of me as a student at the time, and be able to ask myself, why are we still reading? The story can end right here. This is the ending. There was a fire that killed his grandmother. And so just getting kids to think about approaching literature in that way. You don't have to read a work of literature from beginning to end, because it is important. It is important that you understand that the experience is what matters most. The lesson learned from that experience is what matters the most, not necessarily every minute textual detail. And so I think that it's a very strong order of us to, as educators, to expose children to literature that does not have this sort of linear path. And they will be better critical thinkers because of it, and they will be more in touch with their culture, with their language, and with all of the hodgepodge of all of those things that create the experiences that are so real to them and that not may be readily identifiable for groups outside of those identification categories that they subscribe to, whether it is race, sex, gender, um, socioeconomic status, any of those subscripts that they find themselves a part of would be hard for them to try to explain if they didn't have literature. And so I like to again reiterate that nonlinear texts do not follow chronological sequence. Nonlinear texts require students to go into the text and to be exposed to experience rather than to read from a beginning, a middle, and an end. And nonlinear text allows students the autonomy to be able to say, hey, maybe the story began on the first page and also ended on the first page. And that's enough, and that's okay, and that's fine. So, yeah, I look forward to an era where we have more educators that are open to nonlinear text.
Thank you, Mr. Nickerson. That was amazing to actually think that it's possible to describe stories in a nonlinear way, and how the box of linearity, if you will, is a box. I'm thinking about something I saw on social media by JeanRenoit just this past week. He's the ambassador for the Library of Congress for young literature, and he was like, "Listen, this is a traumatizing moment, and children have trauma in their lives, and their stories need to reflect those traumas." And so, I'm curious, you mentioned Black Boy, but what other stories can you suggest perhaps for younger readers that would allow them to sort of understand that stories neither have to be linear, nor should we ignore the very real traumas of their lives and still allow them to be seen?
Well, I think of a host of texts. The beauty of having worked now at the middle school level, going back to working at the middle school level, is that students began the year looking at heroes' journeys and looking at, of course, trauma-informed environments and things of that magnitude. And so one of the texts was A Long Walk to Water, and another one was A Long Way Gone. A Long Walk to Water was written by Linda Sue Parks, and it speaks about the actual Sudanese civil war that occurred. And in it, you have two voices, but one story. One is a real voice of a actual survivor who is a real person and actually is the subject that supplied Linda Sue Park with the information about the Sudanese civil war. But the other is a fictitious character who is the what if character that possibly survived the war. And so it's two different voices, but it's still one story. So the kids are able to see how the story opens up with this full out fledged war. The kids don't know where Sudan is. They don't know what's the reason for the war, anything. They're just thrown straight into knowing that there's a war, and that this war has disrupted natural resources and the supply thereof to men, women, and children. And so the kids are automatically, they're like, well, can they just tell us where the war is, or why is this happening, or what's going on? And so the intrigue of that in itself posed for them the challenge of thinking critically and of searching for information, where the teacher was not just giving them the boring story. Hey guys, who are the characters? Hey, what happened first? What happened next? It was not that. It was they were thrown into action, action that reflected some of their experiences. Some of them go home to environments that are short of natural resources or that are short of something. Some of the account of the responsibilities that they have brushed upon their shoulders, because we tend to forget that adolescents do have responsibility, and adolescents do have real emotions that they struggle with on a day-to-day basis. The text "A Long Way Gone" by Ishmael Bia. I think you have it on the slide, right, Doc? "A Long Way Gone" was written also by Ishmael Bia, and I compared it with the text by Remarque, "All Quiet on the Western Front." And this is a text that "All Quiet on the Western Front" is indeed a canonical text. It was written in 1929 originally, and it too is about war, but it has a very linear trajectory. Paul, there's nothing non-linear about Paul's story. Paul is a kid who follows propaganda and is led to believe that war is glorious. And he follows this beginning to ending kind of predictable story. He dies. And he dies in war, and he doesn't, there's nothing, all of his friends die along with him. And so there's nothing really unexpected about All Quiet on the Western Front. But when you pair it with A Long Way Gone, A Long Way Gone, again, is a story that starts with the end and kind of gives you an understanding of the beginning. And so that's why I would, say that an alternative text for All Quiet on the Western Front would be A Long Way Gone, which is about the war in Sierra Leone versus World War One, which is the concept in All Quiet on the Western Front. I like to talk about literature, but I'm just, that's just a short.
Short. Oh,
No.
that wasn't short, but that's okay. We know English is your bias. Khalil?
So I like the point you made about linear structure. So it's almost as if during this time, as we're living through this pandemic, right? Why would a book start for all of us if it was written back in October, back in September? It would have this very straightforward path as to why we got up to this point in the virus, in this pandemic time. But in reality, we all found out, we all reacted to it in the past month and a half. So why are we starting at that time? But why are we starting in October if a book was written? So it's almost as if we're living through the middle of a story in this very linear structure of a book. While if it was written by someone else who didn't assimilate to these like linear like patterns, we would be the beginning right now. We are the beginning. And then we can go back a year, we can go back 5 and see what were we doing? What were we doing to contribute to this all-out pandemic that everything stops? Everything's shut down now. Yes. So, or this can be the end. This could be the end of the book. We could be living all through the very end of the book, and everything ends now.
Create stories that give people a expectation of, hey, here's the characters, here's likely how these characters fit into the prototypes that you've learned about all of your life. We could speak about character archetypes, and there's a host of those, but we know that we always look for the victor, we always look for the victim in every story. And when the paradigms are not set up to present those sort of direct polar opposites, then everyone gets a little shaken, like, oh my God, the story's not making sense. I don't understand what it's saying. When is it going to end? Too many voices in this story. So it's so uncomfortable to have to read a text that requires you to do that much analytical excavation, I would call it. You have to dig and you have to put pieces together. We're so used to stories being put before us and already have been put together, because we are a culture that comes from oral tradition. Everyone put together their own version of the story, and we as people do not like to be uncomfortable. Assimilation is comfortable. Dissimilation is not. So I'm just
Wow. I mean, so that was, you said a lot, and I'm grateful for the conversation. So I'm looking forward to actually hearing from our other collaborators about this and continuing to do this work. That you all inspire me so much, and I appreciate your time. And so, man, I'm going to take all that and think about it. Like, mind blown. It's like this. right? Logic. What is logic in an system that is not chronologic, right? And so chronos, the time, logic, we can't, because even in thinking about what Khalil was just saying, like, what, imagine if the story begins in October and this is the end of the story in English, right? You're talking about the pace of something happening so quickly, and the stories that are often sort of genuflexed between time warped. And man, I appreciate this conversation. All right.
With pandemic and global panic, there will be an uproar of a new age and birth of a new generation, giving Generation Z, the youngest generation so far, a new and great responsibility. We're left to react at a rapid pace and reflect on the actions of the generations before us. We're essentially burdened with either reacting in chaos and selfishness or reacting proactively and with intentions of leadership. This chaos and selfishness is what we're living in right now, and it is because of the reactions of millennials and Gen X. Whether we're only children or not, we have to realize that we have all become new big brothers and big sisters to children who now have to call pandemic their childhood. And although these children are living in a time of crisis, it doesn't mean that it has to feel like a time of crisis. We have a new opportunity and new responsibility to change how we are being taught and how we teach. Personally, I'm the eldest of 3, and I realized that my experience throughout the last month is not for me. The way I've handled my academic career, my home life, my mental and physical health, whatever the case may be, it isn't really for me at all. It's for my little brother and my little sister, who look to me as an exemplar for how they should react. From the time they were born to now, I've had the responsibility to teach my siblings whatever I could, and especially after this time of crisis, of global crisis, I can't just sit back and do nothing while my siblings have to shift the entire way they view school. And it is this responsibility that gets me so frustrated when with my peers who have seen this time of social distancing and quarantine as a time, for lack of better words, to live it up. It's not a time to just be carefree. It is a crucial period for all of us as young leaders to stay aware and be literate for the generations to come. This time isn't just going to fly by. It's going to shift everything we know, especially about how we conduct ourselves as leaders. Just because someone may not be a sibling, that doesn't mean you're not a role model. So I feel it is especially important for the teens of today to educate themselves, to be proactive educators for the young kids of tomorrow.
I like to think that a big part of any teenager's formative high school experience is being able to form and establish an identity. As it is, I think self-identity is already a big question mark. A lot of people don't really know who they are, what they like to do. I had to ask myself these questions around 2.5 years ago when I first moved to Princeton, after having spent the majority of my life abroad in China. Didn't really know who I was, didn't really understand my cultural, makeup, or my ethnic background, and I never really had to. I grew up attending international schools where the entire student population was diverse and no one had the same story. So I guess that just became sort of expected. Like, everyone was supposed to be different. No one was the same. So we never really talked about it. But after moving here, I realized that I needed to understand who I was. And I think I was confused at first because I had been so used to just saying, oh no, I'm American. That's it. But having moved to the States, I realized that there was so much more to being an American. I had an African American father and then an Asian American mother who was half Indian and half Chinese. And I realized that sort of made me, a nice mix of a bunch of different cultures. And I had to embrace that and really understand it. but I didn't know how. So I remember when I first moved here, my mom would try and speak to me in Mandarin, which was something that we used to do every day for 10 years, but it made me uncomfortable. I'd be like, I would either only answer in English or I would pretend not to understand. Not pretend, but I just wouldn't answer. And it would be like, I'm not responding unless you speak to me in English. Which now obviously is really upsetting because being able to speak Mandarin is such a gift, and it's also just a part of who I am. That's a part of my story, and I think it's so important that each and every person can understand the significance of their cultural heritage, I guess, and their ethnic background, because these parts of us are so important. And I think a good way to really understand that is to do your research. So go online if you want to know more about your ethnicity and your heritage. Then just go online and do your research. You can talk to your family members. So I've had in-depth conversations with grandparents on both sides to just know a little bit more about the history of my lineage, I guess. And it's been really good for me just understanding my cultural identity and embracing both sides. Not only am I an African American, but I also am an Asian American, and I can really learn from both sides of my family. So.
Wow. Thank you, Yanni. Thank you, Sky. That was amazing. Your contributions to this can't really be understated. And so I'd like to start with you, Yanni. You discussed speaking Mandarin and biculturality or multiculturalism that sort of runs as part of your heritage as a gift. How did you come to this point to recognize it as a gift?
I think it was sort of through talking to my other friends that I had made here. And it was only really something that I only started really recognizing my heritage as a gift this year, because I would talk to my friends about sort of where they were from, and they'd have all these stories like, oh, my grandparents came from this place and we do this and this for these holidays. And I was kind of like, whoa, that's really, really cool. And then I would sort of stop and think, and I was like, I don't really know that much about why we do things the way we do things in my family. And I realized that, especially with speaking Mandarin and my whole, I guess my whole sort of journey with living in China and being able to speak Mandarin and getting to grow up abroad, I think that's a crazy experience, and I'm so fortunate to have got this experience. And I think that it's something that I should embrace. It's something that I should be proud of. It's made me who I am today, and I realize now how crazy it is and how lucky I am to have this be a part of my story.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the racist and anti-Asian culture that we currently are experiencing in this moment. What did that do?
It makes me mad. It makes me so mad. And I talked to my friends who we all met in Beijing, and I talked to them about it. And it's just, I think a lot of people in this country have this sort of mindset. When the coronavirus was a huge issue back in January, in China, it was kind of like, oh, well, they're Chinese. They don't have the technology to prevent it, or they're not, I've heard that they weren't clean, that it's dirty over there. And I don't understand how people can have such warped minds. Like, how can you be so closed off in the world? You don't care to learn about other cultures, and you really speak without having any knowledge. How can you have such a misunderstanding of this entire race of people? It made me angry. And I don't know, you see the videos on YouTube of like these people harassing people of Asian heritage, and it's just, I don't know, we're all humans, I think, and a viral pandemic, really, once a virus hits a population, it was inevitable that it was going to get here. And like, I see people blaming, oh, this is all the Chinese people's fault. Like, some man decided to eat a bat and now like my senior year's canceled. Like, no, it's a virus. It was going to get here. It was a matter of time. And to be quite frank, we had all the time in the world to prepare for it. And we decided, we were like, oh, we're Americans, we're better than the Chinese, this can't affect us, we're better than the Italians. No, we're all people. And at the end of the day, we were fools for thinking, or for just acting like this wasn't I guess, a real problem, and that it was a problem for the Chinese because they were Chinese. So
Yeah. I think we in our class we talked about fallacies, and this is what you bring all of that, right? That, you know, it's a lot to consider, and so I really appreciate your in the moment perspective on that. So Sky, you talk about carrying the weight of schooling for your siblings. You have what, 2 siblings? Okay. And so what does it mean to actually feel like in this moment you wanted to participate because you want to be like, look, there are better options. I don't want my siblings to experience the same things I've experienced or felt. What's that mean?
So I just want to start off, I would never call myself like a professor or try to discredit the teachings of my parents or like traditional educators. But since I was 5, when my sister was born, I became a teacher. So as an older sibling, I am teaching my siblings, whether I know it or not, like just basic ways that I like live my life. They're looking at me because I'm older and I like to consider myself more mature. So from a young age to now and then later on in life, I will always be a teacher to my siblings. So I've always seen that as a great responsibility. So not only with the shift in education from the social distancing and quarantining, you have kids that are growing up like isolating themselves in school because they're not properly educated they don't have proper role models and leaders. So I have taken it to myself even before this, talking to my siblings, telling them that if, say, they are the only in a room, it is important for them to still share and not be afraid to be the only. And after this social distancing and quarantining, I realized that there are kids who are growing up, this is all they're going to know. This learning in their house is all they're going to know. So you have to think about, oh, so our curriculum's changing, like are we taking our children education into our own hands? So we have to consider what we're teaching them. So even if you don't have your own sibling or you don't have like younger people with you, you still have to understand either online or in person. You have to have be a proper role model because there are kids that are looking up to you whether you know it or not.
Yeah, it's part of that richness of passing on. Debbie Reese, she's a scholar, tribally, she describes herself as tribally enrolled. She's a scholar of indigenous literature for children, and she describes it as curtains, sort of pulling up the curtain, and that's a way to protect yourself. So you're talking about students who isolate themselves in classrooms and in schools, and she talks about how you know, we have windows, we have mirrors, we have sliding glass doors, but we have curtains. And so that's when that isolation is a way to sort of separate yourself from the chaos, from the hurt, the pain inflicted on you in classrooms. And then of course, going back to Paul Laurence Dunbar, we wear the mask that grins and lies. As a teacher, if you're not taking the time to go back and check in on that, I think that's important. And so, yeah, I respect, as an educator, a career educator, I respect that you say, I have a younger sister, and that from the time she was born, I became a teacher. Because I think I agree. I have a younger sister, and I feel the same way. Yeah, I absolutely feel the same way. So, Sky, you're an artist.
Yes.
Does being an artist have anything to do with your choice of works by Vashti Harrison or Ta-Nehisi Coates?
Yeah, being an artist actually has everything to do with my choices. So I took art in 2 forms. So you have like being an artist with your words and also being a visual artist. So for my first choice, Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, he's an artist with words. Everything that he says and everything that he writes down, he's sharing his art. The first time I discovered him, I think I was 10, and I saw a talk that he did, and it was talking about how you should be sensitive around the words you use. And this particular topic was how people outside of Black communities try to use the N-word. And then he relates it to people outside of female communities using like the V word, and people outside of queer communities using the F word. So that was my first time. I was like, oh my gosh, this man is an artist with words. Like he's painting with words. Like that was amazing. So that's why I chose that book, because I look up to him as an artist with words. But for Vashti Harrison, I've been following her work on Instagram for years now, and I've always admired how she's been portraying Black and brown children, particularly Black and brown girls, like the collaboration that she did with Lupita Nyong'o. So that was amazing. So that's why I chose her two books. Yeah, I love those, because I think it's important for children, not only Black and brown children, but especially Black and brown children, to see, because of course you're going to hear, oh, there are Black leaders, but I think it's very important to see them. So you have books like this with pictures. The pictures are so important because you can see with your own eyes that, oh, these people not only look like me, they have same thought as me, and you're just able to visualize that. So I think art is very important for especially kids, so they can view themselves.
I love Soy too, because Soy tackles another really important issue of colorism, right? And sort of beginning to understand your beauty and your Blackness. And she relates it to the stars and the sky. And oh, yes. And so I imagine, because I don't have a daughter and I don't have any young children, and I teach high school. But I bought the book as soon as I saw it because I was like, oh, yes. So I appreciate that. Okay. So, Yanni, Maya Angelou was also an artist. So how is coming of age as a voiceless girl the same for both protagonists? In your choice, you picked Jane Eyre's work, and then you picked Maya Angelou's work. And so, yeah, talk to me a little bit about a female protagonist being voiceless. What do you think?
So I think in my life, and I'm not going to speak for all teenage girls, but I think we all have this moment, some point in our lives, where we're like, wow, I'm a girl, and I'm gonna have to be a girl for the rest of my life. And I think in both books, in Jane Eyre, she goes through these stages where she feels like she's being made to be quiet and sort of forced to not talk. And then obviously with Maya Angelou, she chooses to not speak for several years. And I think I guess with all females, when we're coming of age, we have these moments where you just kind of feel like my voice is not being heard. I am no longer being heard by the people around me. And I don't know. I think both novels portray it, but I think Maya Angelou's, where she chooses not to speak, she chooses just not to talk at all. And then with Jane Eyre, it's more of this whole, oh, I'm being oppressed, so I'm just going to do everything I can in my power to make sure that people have these huge reactions to me and whatnot. And I think having that pivotal moment where you realize I need to do what I can so that people hear my voice. So Maya choosing to use her voice again and speak out about things, I think that's really important. And knowing that the only way that sort of make yourself be heard and to ensure that you sort of you see the changes that you want to see be made is to use your voice and to speak up about it.
Yeah, I think it's profound that you start by saying, I'm a girl and I'm going to have to wear this identity. And so that is probably, again, one of the coolest, most revolutionary ideas I think we have here in the 21st century is that we, like race, our identity is a social construct around our gender. And in a society and in a time where more and more people are recognizing the fluidity of identity, right? It can be a tension. And so I just want to celebrate both of you right now because I'm so excited that you can share your thoughts in a very real and organic way. And I look forward to joining and continuing the conversation with our other collaborators. And I look forward to the work that you will both do in the future because I know that this moment, this time, is defining not only who you are, but the next generation of education, the next generation of learner, the next generation of teacher, the next generation of school, and you're getting in on the ground floor. And so I really appreciate your time and look forward
wrap in with you guys a little bit later.
Expanding the canon at the place where the beat drops is really about sustaining the humanity of students in the classroom, using the tools we have available, seeing students, hearing their voices, and actively looking for them in the many places they may be found, valuing their stories, and still holding everyone accountable, including teachers, to be mindful and to be better. Thank you for participating with us, and we hope there was something that inspired you. Be well.